Hey guys, welcome back to Heritage Hollow Homestead. I am out here trying to catch a few minutes in between the rain and do a little bit of garden chores. And I was just checking out how everything's growing, and I wanted to talk about something that you may have never heard of before, and something that you should try in your own garden, and that is called high intensity gardening. Okay guys, so if you've never heard of what high intensity gardening is, it is basically the concept that you can, in a small space, grow a lot of food. And traditionally, this has been a huge no-no. My grandparents and great-grandparents, they would be ashamed of how I am growing my food in these raised beds instead of tilling everything up and spacing everything out and following the rules. So they would probably be a little disappointed in me being a garden rule breaker, but this is what is working best for us, and I am going to kind of go over how it works. Okay, so behind me you may be able to see I have lots of tomatoes growing, and they are growing in with the same bed as pole beans. Way down underneath them are marigolds in the very bottom. I don't know if you can see a little hint of orange right there. And further underneath are basil. And way back there in the back, you can see all of our carrots are starting to grow nicely right here. So that seems like a lot, all in one little 3x6 space. And traditionally speaking, and the mindset would be this is all too close together. It will never work. So the question is, how and why am I trying to make it work? Okay, so here's the secret to this weird, crazy thing called high intensity gardening. It is the basic concept that as long as you keep your soil extremely nutrient dense, it will be able to support growing your plants in a much closer fashion. So, in days gone by, the way that you would garden would be to plow up your field and to plant with specific spacing between each seed and also between each row. The reason for that was because so that they could get in there with their tractors and with their team of mules, and my great grandfather's case, and work the fields successfully. And they were growing usually for a market type scenario, or in a larger agricultural setting, and they needed to be able to get in between all of the plants, and work the soil. And in order to do that, everything had to be spread further apart. Well, newsflash, I don't even own a tractor, so why in the world would I need to plow up this huge area just to plant some tomatoes? Okay, so like I said, the reasoning behind the way people used to garden, what used to be the norm, was because they were taking what worked in a larger agricultural setting, and they had larger equipment, and or larger plows and all of that type of stuff, and they had to have more space in order to be able to grow. So then whenever you had the victory gardens and all of the home gardening in small spaces, was really pushed, 100 years ago even. People, they all were, they probably had someone in their family even that was a farmer. And so what they did was they took the ideas behind what the larger farms were doing, and they just squished it down into a home setting, miniaturized it, and that's how they grew. And that is how the whole modern, somewhat modern day idea behind plowing and planting and spacing, where those ideas came from. The problem with that is the home gardener doesn't need to get a tractor. in between those rows. And you know, I don't have a team of mules that I'm trying to work. So what happened is you have a lot of wasted space, and also when you're plowing continually, tearing up your dirt over and over again, you're really interrupting all of those microorganisms that are at work in your soil. They're very beneficial, and you're just really doing a lot of work for no good reason. So the idea of high intensity gardening is just the simple fact of growing as much as possible in one small space. And how you make that work is you make sure that you start out with really good soil, and that you are able to feed those plants throughout their growth really good organic material, and continue to add to that, because your plants are only going to be as healthy as the soil that they are in. And so once you turn and come into a raised bed scenario, I'm able to control all of the soil that's in that one little area. And so I get to choose what all is happening in that little square foot bed. You know, like a 6x3 bed here, I can easily amend that, and I'm not having to plow it up and turn it over continually. So therefore, because I know exactly what's in the soil and what it's capable of supporting, I know how much I'm going to be able to grow in this one small area. So the next part of that is, if you were in a traditional setting where you're going to be plowing, you would plow about 3 foot wide, 2 to 3 feet would be how wide each one of your plowed areas would be for your seed. And in this case, I'm not going to be plowing anything. I'm not going to be disrupting the soil. So I can use all 3 feet of this bed to plant in, because I'm not going to be disrupting it with a plow or a tiller. And I'm just going to come through and hand weed as necessary. So the spacing requirements can greatly go down in between each plant, because I'm not going to have any machinery in here around my plants, and because I am using a high intensity method of putting nutrients into my soil, I am going to be able to have more plants in one space and them thrive. Okay, so instead of usually, let me stand up here, in a bed this size, this is 24 feet long and 3 feet wide, in a old-fashioned traditional setting of plowing your field up, tilling it up, you would plant 1 row of beans, and that would be it for this area right here. So if I planted 1 row of beans here, I would have 24 foot of beans, and that would be it. That's all I would be able to grow in this, because I would be tilling around it. Okay, because it's in a raised bed scenario and I'm controlling the soil, I'm able to have 24 foot of beans and 24 tomatoes, 10 sweet potato plants, spinach, and then we also have bush beans in here. We have our carrots. All of that is able to grow together because it's not going to be disrupted by a tiller. So that is where the beauty of this high intensity growing comes into play. The secondary benefit of planting things closer together is that as they grow and leaf out, those leaves will actually choke out and shade the soil, and you will have considerably less amount of weeding. Right now it's been raining every single day for, I don't know, probably a week and a half. We've got another week of rain every day. I'm going to have weeds in here I'm going to have to pull, but nothing like what would be growing if this was just in a traditional tilled bed. So like as my tomatoes on the other side of this, as they grow up, they are shading out the weeds, and the carrots, which do not like hot weather, they're going to benefit from the shade of the larger tomatoes. The basil is also going to benefit from the shade of the larger tomatoes. The beans are putting nitrogen back into the soil that the tomatoes are going to benefit from. Okay, so I am trying to convince you that planting in this way is super beneficial because it is, and it will save you a lot of work, and you will get so much more from your space, from your gardening space. There are a couple of drawbacks, and these are things that you will have to stay on top of if you choose to plant everything more densely. One is the drawback of you will continually need to feed your soil. Now, in my opinion, feeding your soil is much easier than tilling over and over again. We have chickens and goats and all sorts of, and rabbits. So we have plenty of organic material to be able to feed our plants with. If you do not have that, I can see where you might think that cost effectiveness of trying to continually feed your soil may not be the best, but it really is not very expensive at all, even if you're buying an organic fertilizer to come through once every 2 weeks and feed your plants. So the second drawback would be that when you're growing more intensely, and you can see how close all of my plants are here, you are going to have the possibility that if you get a disease in something, that it could spread much quicker because all of your plants are touching. Your plants do need airflow in order to be successful, and the airflow will keep down the fungus and the bacteria and the molds, okay? However, when you're feeding your soil and they're getting plenty of nutrients, your plants are going to be a lot hardier, and that is just something you will need to keep an eye on if you see any type of disease beginning to start, or bacteria or mold, fungus, just to be on top of it and take those leaves away so it doesn't spread. The second problem might be pest. That pest could easily transfer as they go down your plants. The simple solution to that is to not plant a lot of things that are in the same family, but to space out your plants of the same types of family into separate raised beds, and that will diminish the likelihood of pests taking over quickly. So I hope that this helped you. I hope this will encourage you to try a new way of gardening, high intensity gardening. It has been wildly successful for us, and I will be doing more videos on it coming up soon. Hope you guys have a good day. Bye. Okay guys, so to break it down a little bit for you, give you more of a visual of the difference between growing a more traditional fashion and growing in this way where you're really cramming a lot of things into a small space. If I have 5 approximately 24-foot long rows. If I were to have tilled up the same area, the same spot, and planted traditionally, I would have been able to plant a 24-foot row of beans, which would be basically this one length right here. That would have only been beans. And then I would have been able to plant a row of tomatoes, and if traditionally spaced, those tomatoes I would be able to plant in 24 feet, probably about 8 at the most tomatoes in my garden this year. If I had planted my sweet potatoes, that would have been probably 1 row. And let's see what else. Potatoes. I would have been able to plant my potatoes, 1 row of potatoes, and that would be, probably would have been able to actually put in the ground as far as seed potatoes about maybe 15. Okay, so I'm 4 rows in here. My last row, if I had planted my sunflowers, I would have been able to have 1 row of sunflowers, and that would be it. That's all I would be able to plant in this one area. So instead, I did a few calculations. Ooh, my phone's going crooked. I'm sorry. And because I'm able to grow my pole beans and as well as putting my bush beans in between like my tomato plants and such, I, instead of having only 24 feet of growing space for my beans this year, I have 300 foot of the equivalent of what of 300 foot of beans growing in this small space. And that is because I have planted them as a border all the way around. I have planted them in between plants, and just really maximize the amount of growing space that they're going to have, and as well as growing them on some teepees. So that alone should give you a visual of the difference between growing in one straight line and what you're able to do with raised beds. My tomatoes, if I had grown traditionally, I said maybe 9 or 10, really only like 8 if you do the traditional 3 to 4 feet apart. In this way, growing them closer together and just making sure that they are pruned well and well fed, I am able to take their space amounts, that the recommended spacing amounts of 3 to 4 feet apart, and I'm able to really shrink that down to like 1.5 feet apart, and I've off spaced them in my beds, so I'm able to double up on them. I have like 2 rows growing side by side. Instead of being able to only grow 8 tomatoes in a 24-foot space, I am able to grow in this area. Let's see, I have 4, 8, 16, 24, I'm trying to count them up, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 36 to 39 tomatoes. So that is crazy to me, the difference. You can choose to grow 8 tomatoes, or you could choose in the same space to grow almost 40 tomato plants. And then you can add in there, I have grown, because in my potatoes that are right here behind me, they're starting to bloom nicely, because I chose to plant them instead of one straight line. I planted them across, and we're able to do 5 short rows for every one of my beds. I planted, instead of only 24 foot of potatoes, I think I planted 3, 6, 9, 12, 13, 15, 60 feet worth of potatoes if I had grown them in a traditional setting, because potatoes, once again, they don't mind being closer together as long as they're well fed. Doesn't hurt their feelings at all. Same with my sweet potatoes. I've used my lettuce as a ground cover anywhere extra that I had bare soil. That's going to reduce the amount of any type of disease, soil diseases. When it rains, sometimes those diseases can splash up from the soil onto your plant. The lettuce is going to work as a natural ground cover, so I've added that in anywhere extra that I possibly could. So we'll have all of that extra. We have peppers, we have sunflowers. We have those growing with our pole beans. The pole beans will climb the sunflowers. That's kind of doubling up your growing space right there. We have carrots growing as a ground cover, radishes growing as a ground cover. We are able to plant our corn in blocks and greatly reduce the amount of space that is needed for growing our corn. In a 4 foot by 4 foot block, you can grow approximately 12 to 16 stalks of corn. Mine are all growing right now. I'm going to weed them out. I'm waiting to see what is going to be the strongest. We'll probably end up with about 12 to 14 for that one little area. Whereas if I had used that 4 foot as only 4 foot of, in a line, one straight line, I would have only been able to plant like 4 corn. So you will be tripling to quadrupling, or possibly even more, depending on what you're planting, your amount of produce that you will be getting from your square footage if you choose to plant in raised beds and plant more densely. So I'm going to take you around, show you a few of the things that are growing here and how they are growing together and working together. Some plants do work better with companion planting. There are a few plants that you would not want to put closely together in the same bed. But as I go through here, I'll give you a few ideas of things that do work good together, and I'll show you how they are planted. Okay guys, right here you will see I have my pole beans, and they are growing right next to my entire bed of potatoes. Beans and potatoes go great together. The beans will give some extra nitrogen back into this soil. The potatoes won't mind that at all. And come over here. Once again, we have pole beans and we have sweet potatoes. Those sweet potatoes aren't going to mind the pole beans being over on this side at all. The beans will be growing up. The sweet potatoes will be growing under the ground, so they will not be fighting for each other's space. So that's also a plus. And then with our tomatoes, they are very close together right now. I will be pruning these heavily to increase airflow throughout them and to reduce chances of disease. But I have not weeded this bed at all, and as you can see down in here, because the tomatoes are growing close together, there is hardly any weeds growing in here at all. We have these bush beans growing with our tomatoes. That is going to, they will work well together. These will put nitrogen back. The tomatoes need some extra nitrogen. We have carrots underneath our tomatoes. Those carrots are going to grow down while the tomatoes are growing up. Carrots are a cooler weather crop. Tomatoes are going to love the heat. They're going to shade those carrots. They're going to work together. The carrots, as they grow down, are going to aerate the soil a little bit. It's going to work great together. We have our marigolds that are planted with our tomatoes for the reason of helping reduce pests, especially down here at the bottom. And basil and tomato. I don't know what's happening here. There we go. Basil and tomatoes. Those usually go quite well together. Alright. Look at all those flowers. So that's what's growing here, as well as the pole beans in the back, adding more nitrogen. So all of this is going to work well together. And like I said, right now it is very dense, but I will be pruning these back, especially all the bottom leaves. They will all be gone. Don't want anything touching the soil, and that will reduce our chances of any disease spreading. And once these are pruned well, they will be just fine. Okay guys, so I'm going to come on around here, and this is a 4x8 bed, and I do have a lot of weeding to do. You can tell the difference between out here where the sun's hitting and further inside where there's hardly any grass growing at all. I'll show you because it shades it out. Around our peppers here, we don't have hardly any weeds, and that is the goal that we're going for here, is for all of this foliage to shade out our weeds. For here, and you won't even be able to see them very clearly, but we have an outer row of onions. Onions love being a little bit cooler. So as my sunflowers and beans grow, they're going to shade my onions, give them a little protection. We have some lavender for our pollinators. We have, once again, all of our beans are growing in nicely and adding that nitrogen back to our soil. And then we have our pole beans and our sunflowers are growing together. Those will work together. And in between we have peppers. Those grow great along with our beans. They're going to benefit from each other. And as you can tell here, let's take a look in here. Our peppers are doing very good. Look at that. That's beautiful. Okay. And because we are growing all of this together, I have 8, 16, and 4 and 4, so 8 more. I have tripled my growing space with that alone of the bush beans, as well as I have 8 feet of pole beans growing with our sunflowers. The one in the back mirrors this, so we'll move along to this one. Okay, for here, you can tell zucchini plants, they really do. They take up a lot of ground space. So, for their companion planting, I chose to grow lettuces around the bases of them, and sunflowers in the back because they're not going to compete for space. The sunflowers are going to grow tall, zucchini's going to stay down low. and so a rabbit got in here and like demolished my lettuce. It is pitiful. I think it's a rabbit. I can't imagine anything else that would have done this, but apparently it doesn't like romaine, so my romaine lettuce is doing great. We're going to have all of our cucumbers and all of our beans as they start to grow coming up here. And then we have some more lettuce around the bottom. And I have some lettuce tucked in here behind these leaves, hanging in a little bucket. And it's doing well because it's thriving on the shade that the zucchini is giving it. Got lots of herbs I got to plant in my herb garden. So here's another example. I don't know if you can tell, but the zucchini plant's already as tall or taller than my chair. These require a lot of space. So we have 2 zucchini plants growing next to each other. Back in there is another hanging plant of lettuce. Over here we have our pole beans. Our lettuce in the middle will be shaded out by these pole beans, and it will thrive in that shade where nothing else would. Well, a few other things would, I should say, nothing else. And then we have a few herbs and some more lettuce over here, and sunflowers in the back. Okay, let's go check out the back one. Okay, this bed did not get put in till much later on, so that's why everything back here is growing a little bit less. And I had to use a different type of soil, and my beans are definitely lacking, and I have to feed them. Do you see how yellow they are? They're not green. See how green the grass and the tomatoes are? These are struggling, and I have to feed them. But we have in here, we have okra growing, and then this right here is radishes. The okra is going to grow up. It's going to shade the radishes. So these are going to be able to grow in here together and do great. We have all of our bush beans and our sunflowers in the back. And this is the perfect example, guys, of why soil is so important. This is a bagged soil, organic soil from Lowe's. And while everything is growing, it is not, I can tell by the color of all of these that they're struggling, versus I had mushroom compost and topsoil brought into me by the truckload for the other plants, doing so much better. So your soil makes a huge difference. So we have our tomatoes here. Once again, these were all started at the same time. These are all seeds that were started at the same time, these tomatoes. These are just stronger and these are weaker. But we have 6 tomatoes in here. All of these beans, the okra and the radishes and sunflowers, all in this one space. They will all work well together. I will be coming back and putting some more ground cover type plants in here as well. Probably some more types of lettuces and such. Got some lettuce here. We have cucumbers and beans that will be growing on our trellis. We have beans that will be growing on our sunflowers. Lots of lettuce for our ground cover inside of our teepee. We have 6 more tomatoes. They're all doing really well. More beans. And then we have our block of corn. And on each corner down here, we're going to have squash plants. Those will be able to grow and kind of hang over the edge. That won't bother anything. So that is what we have growing here. And once again, I have not been able to mow because of all the rain, how grassy and how much crabgrass is on the outside. But once you look in here, where there's much less weeding to be done, where everything has started to shade out the weeds. Okay guys, so that is my garden and how I'm growing things close together to maximize my space. This is a newer concept. I wouldn't say it's a new concept. I know people have been gardening this way for several years now. And if you are new to this and you're a little afraid to plant very close together, what you could start to do is take your recommended spacing guide that is given on your seed packets, and the first year that you plant in your raised bed, you could start by, say it says 3 feet apart, you could try planting your stuff 2 feet apart. And if you're successful with that, take some notes of that, and the next year maybe try you know, 1.5 feet apart, and just play with that number. Take notes, watch your plants, take notes of disease or anything of that nature that might be happening, and find your own magic number for your spacing for each plant in your area. I know that this could easily waver between what your grow zone is and what your climate and conditions are like. For us, this has been definitely proven to be much more productive, and it has greatly reduced the amount of garden work that has to be done on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. I tend to take our raised beds and continue them on for another probably 40 feet out, but that will be for another time, and we will just continue adding our raised beds as we have the time, the money. And while it is more expensive to add the raised beds, you know, we don't own a tractor. I don't own a tiller. So when you think of the expense of just those two things alone versus just building your raised beds and having your soil brought in, my opinion, it's a win-win. It is still cheaper in the long run. This is my favorite way to garden, and I have gardened by tilling up our soil for as long as I've ever known, since I was big enough to stand up and put a seed in the ground. My family has always just plowed a huge area of garden, and we've planted that way. And I will say, the one thing I do miss about having raised beds and not having our field plowed and tilled and gotten ready is I do miss the smell of fresh plowed dirt. But I live right across the street from a farm who's constantly plowing up their fields, and so I still get to enjoy that wonderful smell of fresh dirt being turned over. But you know, that's about the only thing I can say that I miss about my old way of gardening versus my new way of gardening. So I hope that this might help you or get you to thinking, even if you only add a few raised beds to what you're already doing in a tilled area. I do think that you could greatly benefit from it. Well, however you're growing, just get out there, plant something, and enjoy the sunshine. Well, we don't really have any. We're kind of lacking that at the moment. It's all rain. But get outside, enjoy some nature and some fresh air. And I hope that everybody's gardens are doing well. And you have a blessed day. Bye. I just happened to think that I actually have a smaller version of an example of what high intensity gardening would look like if you were going to do container gardening. So I'm going to take you in the backyard and show you that as well really quick. Okay guys, so out back, I don't know if anybody saw a video that I made several months ago, but I had bought, they're like an off-brand version of a green stalk. I bought them at the Dollar Tree, and I just want to try it out, see how it's going. I have tons of plants in these, and they are all doing great. So I tried several types of herbs, some different types of lettuce. We have strawberries, we have pine berries, and they are all doing fabulous. So I'm just going to show you how all of that is growing out here in the backyard really quick. This would be a great way to grow a lot in one very small space. We're talking like 2 square feet of space. You could be growing 18 plants. So I want to show you what this looks like, okay?